interesting because it's such a process that is refined, and once you see it, and you see it for what it really is, and you see it played over and over and over again, and you just see everyone else get suckered into it. And you know, so here's what happens: someone comes out, and they say such and such is happening, and you know, the first thing is to start, you know, having a follow-up study that says, oh no, like that's not confirmed, you know, we're casting doubt on this. And then it starts accusing them of scientific misconduct, and then taking money to do this really expensive scientific study from someone that has an interest in its outcome, which is every study on the effing planet.
I mean, I've heard you talk about that strategy of artificial scarcity before. I think we really can apply it to the coronavirus and to healthcare in general. Like with energy, if you disallow the proliferation of technologies of free energy and you just sell people oil, then they have to buy the oil. So these people at the top that control the supply of oil, of course, end up making billions. But the same is true with healthcare, right? Or even there, I mean, all the sectors of the economy, the food supply, the water supply, eventually it seems like they're going after, you know?
Well, that's why I say we're like the bees slowly being poisoned, and I've been blowing that whistle, and now hopefully people can realize what chemical body burden is and why people are being hit with coronavirus, whatever this virus crisis is, whatever strain or form, whether it's man-made or not, that 1 in every 2 people has a chronic illness, and 54% of our children are sick.
Today we have a journalist roundtable, and I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Brandon Smith from morelawsmoreproblems.com. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran. I was active duty from 1994 to 1998, and now basically I'm a DJ and a comedian, and I create content. And you can find that at morelawsmoreproblems.com. And today we are joined by Maryam, Henein, and Zach Vorhies, as well as Doug McKenty. And I'm going to turn it over right now to Doug for more introductions. So take it away, Doug.
All right, right on. I also want to give a shout out to Rob Rubin for helping us produce this at transparentmediatruth.com. My website is theshiftnow.com, and you can check me out at on my Patreon page, The Shift with Doug McKenty, if you're interested in checking it out. Today I'm speaking with Maryam Henein and Zach Vorhies. I'm just going to allow them to introduce themselves so we can get started and get a little bit of background. Zach, do you want to take it?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Zach Vorhies. I'm known as the Google whistleblower. I disclosed over 950 pages of Google's internal documents detailing how they do their censorship. I also sent this to the DOJ Department of Justice Antitrust Division. All
right, great. And Maryam, how about you?
I am an investigative journalist and a functional medicine consultant, and I am best known for directing a documentary film called Vanishing of the Bees, which is still relevant because we are now the bees slowly being poisoned by sublethal doses of everything.
Yeah, I hear that. Maryam, let's start with you because I want to get an idea of, well, you're actually the first person that I've spoken with since I've been doing this who's had a lot of experience in the mainstream media as a journalist in the past. Can you talk about that experience and then what changed and what caused you to want to go towards independent journalism and then starting with the honeycolony.com, producing more of your own stuff?
Yeah, that's great. Yes, I used to be in the mainstream. I came to America as soon as I graduated. I knew there wasn't a lot of opportunity as an Anglophone who wanted to branch out. I often wonder if I went to university in America where I would have landed, and came to LA not because of Hollywood, but because of a boy, and realized like I needed to get a green card. I needed to get working because I'm a worker bee. Mm-hmm. So I eventually landed a job for MSNBC, and that was at a time where the internet was just getting online. And I've been part of the internet since it became kind of mainstream, and I've been on computers because my father worked for IBM. So for a chick, I consider myself savvy. So I landed a job covering the news for Channel 4, and it was a pretty rude awakening of the way I was exposed to journalism, and also our coverage in Canada was always very worldly. And next thing I knew, I was covering chases and realizing that they spend $1 million a year per network during the ratings to cover this inane stuff. So there was like, I was behind the computer, but I often asked to go into the field. And there were a couple of times like there was a drive-by, and I wasn't the type of journalist. I was watching this reporter invading a vigil and asking the parent how they felt, and it just seemed just not the type of journalism. So eventually I quit. Actually found pay stubs where my male counterpart, who was doing my job, was being paid a lot more. Interestingly, the advertising department was in charge of the news because they were afraid that if people logged on, they wouldn't tune in. And so there was kind of a rivalry. And then eventually quit and started pitching stories as a freelance, and they were often my ideas. And I'd go to New York once a year, and I wrote for Detour and Black Book and Penthouse and LA Magazine and Maxim and tons of mainstream outlets. And I had an accident, and that kind of put me on a different trajectory. I was like covering, my beats were sex, Hollywood, and spirituality. So
nice combination.
Yeah, it was a nice combination. And then I got into documentary filmmaking as a researcher.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had an accident, and then I just was put on a different trajectory, and then kind of no longer embraced by the mainstream. And it became harder and harder to pitch ideas. And the editors seem to get younger and younger and more millennial-ish, where you're like pitching a story as a seasoned journalist to a kid that knows nothing. So it changed. And then I started my own magazine.
Well, and tell us a little bit about that, right? Honeycolony.com. What was the impetus behind that? And then now you're, I know, more into the health perspective and the alternative health perspective. So can you give us a little background into that as well?
After my near-death experience, I was hit by an SUV at 35 miles an hour, and I didn't have health insurance.
Mm.
So it took me a year to like literally learn how to walk again using yoga, and my body kind of exploded. I wanted to do like a series of short stories called Mimi's Medical Mishaps because they were comedic, and in reality I had PTSD. And then I discovered really early on that I was allergic to, like, my body just exploded, and so many things. And so I used each thing to really delve and do research and get initiated. So I became like an expert in insomnia and candida. At an early, in 2004, I don't think a lot of people knew about gluten, but I was off gluten, and it made a huge difference. And then I changed my diet, I changed my whole body, and I was still having health issues. And then the bees flew into my life, and I really, because I lived, I just wanted to make this life count and do something that's bigger than me. And so the bees flew into my life. And at one point I was like taking a bath, and I was like, what if I'm become like one of those crazy bee ladies, and like bees kind of stick. And so after the film, my ex-boyfriend and then business partner invested in me and created Honey Colony, which was using the kind of bees as a symbol to proverbially forage for nectar and pollen and find the best sources of information. And so all the products that we sold were products that I used. And then we quickly branded our own products, and we were running a very tight ship as a as a magazine, like had a managing editor or senior editor, or just really like following Google's keywords, getting briefed on SEO optimization, and learning how to write for the internet, which is completely different, right, than the written word, and more so today. And then because of selling CBD, I was in operations, but that was never the deal with my business partner, because I'm not the one with the MBA in business. I'm just intelligent and business. I could be business savvy, but then everything kind of derailed. And in the end, like, to put things in perspective, we went from 215,000 to 200,000 in sales from 2015 to 1 million, which is huge for a startup. So we had goals, and the goal was to exit after 5 years, and the goal was to be by the ocean and write. And then next thing I knew, all our merchant processors, one after the other, like for 6 months, were, Stripe, Square, PayPal, blah, like shutting us down, holding our money, like, and it just became a story in itself. Got robbed. And then just really started feeling what I dubbed and popularizing, called techno-fascism. But that's how the magazine started. And I really took a fondness in biohacking, and then just recently graduated as a certified functional medicine coach, and healed myself and reversed. Oh yeah, along the way, I got sprayed just like the bees, and got diagnosed with fibromyalgia and lupus, and was told, here's some prednisone, here's some Cymbalta, there's no cure, your body's attacking itself, see ya. And I said, F you, that's not what's going to happen. And it took 6 years, and there's something called anti-nuclear antibodies, and I brought them down after 6 years using a whole arsenal, and especially detoxing from chemicals and chemical body burden. And so, yeah, I have always been kind of like a Hunter S. Thompson person, where I put myself in the story and learn through that perspective, infiltrate when I can, and really use my minor in psychology to understand what's motivates. So I've always been interested in covering stories of like, why is that person a pimp? And have like, I was writing for Penthouse and covered a pimp, and just would spend nights speaking to him, not judging him, just trying to understand the psychology of a pimp and a hoe. And yeah, and I'm far away from that world now. And now I'm so determined to take the vaccine deep state down, and bring truth to the surface and regain our sovereignty.
Well, so what was your experience then? I was reading in some of your articles, there came a time period when you were getting so many hits, a lot of people coming to the website, a lot of people reading your work, and then all of a sudden those hits start to dwindle. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, because as I mentioned, we were following SEO, and so we would create articles looking at high search, low competition. So we nabbed a lot of keywords and would formulate stories that were really in the future that are super relevant now. And wanted to get into Google News. We never succeeded there, but we gained 500,000 unique visitors a month. And again, I'm not a Dr. Mercola, never got outside investment. So for us, that was a big deal. And because of the sales, I could have easily been a wealthy woman actually helping people. Wow.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Right. Right.
So, yeah. So then we started seeing, I guess after 2016 was the CBD hell. And then people said to file bankruptcy. I refused.
And just to clarify, this is because you started promoting CBDs and just
started selling my own CBD. That's a hella good CBD. That's liposomal and has Chinese herbs. And I knew I made a good product because I partnered with a brilliant formulator, and I'm really about quality and detail. But then when everything hit the roof, I was doing customer service and dealing with hundreds of angry people. And but many of them wanted their medicine, and I spoke to people who were suffering who this had helped with bladder cancer, anxiety, with PTSD, veterans, sleep. I was like, wow, I thought I made a good product, but this is, and I'm not going to give this up. I'm helping people. And this is a beautiful plant compound. So then there was the Medic update, and there were 2 iterations of it, and they fell under the umbrella of Your Money, Your Life. So kind of any websites that dared to profit out of helping you with your lifestyle, whatever that could be. And that included health and wellness companies. And
what is the Medic update again, just to clarify?
Well, it was called the Medic update, but it was an algorithmic change. And I'm sure Zach could speak more about that. But in the end, we lost our rankings. We lost our rankings initially, and then eventually learned that unless you put in honeycolony.com, you would not find us, even though we were ranking earlier for some of the keywords that we still rank if you use other websites like Swiss Cow or Quant. There's some articles we still come up first. And then we also saw some censorship. Like, for instance, we're not allowed to promote our lubricant.
Right.
Because why? So we're not allowed on Facebook. And there were also along the way algorithmic changes with Facebook that we didn't foresee. And if you're an entrepreneur, you have to pivot, right? And you have to adapt. And eventually they took 4 years of our data, of our campaigns, we could see which demographics we were hitting. My business partner was the one who had run an ad agency and was handling that. And I was focusing predominantly on the content, which I love to do until I had to run the business. And like I say, I'd rather lick the inside of a toilet bowl than do an Excel sheet. That's just me. I'm half left brain, right brain, but I would like to, after all the hell I've gone, just stay in creating. And also when you're in damage control, you're really like putting energy into negativity, right? You have to consider that when you take battles and stuff. So back to the Medic update, eventually had a conversation with Dr. Mercola, who was the only other one that I knew of that was speaking against what I call techno-fascism and taking it a step further and asking to boycott Google. So then 2018, 2019, it gets worse. And the sales, to give you perspective, that sales went from we even through the hell that we went through, because I've just been paying debt really, but because the company is a phoenix like me, that we persisted, and then we made 830,000. The following year, our sales this last year were 386,000. So really slashed, and now because of the Operation Crack Hack by the FDA, that are now persecuting anyone who dares to remind people that they have an immune system and that there are natural things out there that can help. So it's really a war on many fronts. Censorship is worse than ever. The truth is coming out. Luckily, I do really believe there's an awakening because I'm witnessing it. And then basically, then I met Zach. I was doing research for a story. It was increasingly hard to sell anything. And I'll give an example of that. I wrote a brilliant story for anyone who really appreciates research and writing and prose and playing with words about this CBD debacle. And it really also summarized many years of what has happened with marijuana and with CBD just historically. So I just lost my train of thought. So I was writing the story about technofascism and trying to place it and trying to find some confirmation, like what the F is happening with Google?
Right.
because you often, and I saw this when I was making my film Vanishing of the Bees, the beekeepers, their natural inclination was to say, what am I doing wrong? You know, and we would be at marketing meetings, and then our SEO manager that we hired talked about EAT, you know, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And I'm like, yo, bro, we're already doing that. Like, I have an advisory panel where everything is linked to studies.
And this was coming from the Google ratings.
Yeah, this was us trying to appease the gods of Google and forming our whole business model around the infrastructure of SEO optimization. Whereas, like, today, I'd like to know what other search engines are we ranking? How does that work? Because, and also to tell you that words like CBD, you can't even look for them. They're not a keyword. I don't know about coronavirus, but there was another one that they deleted. But CBD definitely have caught that because initially we were using, you know, CBD anxiety to see what people were looking for.
Sure.
In creating different angles and exploring the endocannabinoid system. So then when I was writing about technofascism and I found the link, I'm shuddering at that the Google was a drug company and that Verily and Alphabet, that they were linked to vaccines. And that really perked my ears because we had been covering vaccines and I've been covering vaccines for a long time. We had, I've shared this story with Zach, that we had a story on Merck and their MMR vaccine. And then the next day, the website just disappeared. Can't prove anything.
Right. Wow.
That the entire website, luckily I was able to call the server, which was then in Germany. And I was in Montreal at the time, and revive the website, but it sure freaked us out. And I just learned through a recent FDA, a company that sells silver, that they nipped them at the server and they woke up and it's gone. Website, it's gone. Their business is gone. Just like that.
Right.
So during my research, I came across, like, I had been following Alex Jones for at least a decade and continued to appreciate his reportage despite the fact that he was voted off the island and used as a poster child. I saw through that and I stood for freedom of speech. So anyways, I caught Zach first on Project Veritas, so he was blacked out. And then I saw him on Alex Jones, and I just felt like I connected with him, and I'm like, I'm just going to reach out to this guy and see if he can confirm whether Google is a drug company and what he has to say, without even really delving into not knowing that he also had a passion for health and is a scientist. And so he responded to me, and here we are in the jungle.
Well, let's switch over to Zach actually and get his point of view. Yeah, exactly. And so during this time, you were actually working at Google, huh, Zach?
We can't hear you very well.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, there we go.
So when I met Maryam, I had just disclosed Google's censorship through Project Veritas. And so she saw me and reached out through Twitter, and we just kind of connected, and we had a lot in common. Like, I have a startup business that's making a little bit of money. It certainly made more than it does now. And Maryam has a company that's been, at the height, way more successful than mine has been. And I'm like, oh yeah, this girl's, going out there and selling medicine, and that's in opposition to the big pharma cartels. And so she's been getting messed with. And sites like her are the reason why I, disclosed to the American public, what was happening, because Google shouldn't have the power to, destroy entire sectors of the economy, which is what was happening.
Let's get a little backstory on that. I mean, you actually spent like a year while you were working for Google. Like, you're working for Google and you're thinking you're working for a company that is basically a crowdsourcing platform for, resource material for people that are trying to do research. And you're thinking you're doing a good thing. And then you're discovering that Google is actually starting to shift these algorithms following some different agenda, some corporate agenda that really isn't about, crowdsourcing or just gathering information from the internet and then, and then putting it out there for people without messing with it first. How did that happen to you? Like, how did you become aware that something was up?
Oh man, you know what? It was really clear. It happened right after Donald Trump got elected. The company started doing a full 180-degree turnaround and started to censor what they called fake news. And before they really got into the censorship, they started giving signals out that they were going to do this by sort of like making statements within the company that they had a duty to protect their users from quote unquote fake news, right? And a week after Donald Trump won the election, the CEOs, the CFO, chairman of the board, basically the C-level executives had a roundtable, and they described the election and what it meant to them and what it meant to the company. The chairman, Sergey Brin, was like, I think his exact words were, he was personally offended at the election of Donald Trump. And the CFO broke down into tears talking about how they were going to lose this election. And then the CEO, Sundar Pichai, responded to a question about what Google had done that was successful. And he said, well, the most successful thing that we've done during the election was to censor the fake news. And I went, wow, wait a minute, we're censoring anything? Like, right. I thought our mission statement is organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. That doesn't include censoring. In fact, it's opposed to it. So I started doing some digging. I found documents that were describing what fake news was and how to identify it. And some of the examples that they were using were quite alarming. What they thought was fake news was the idea that Hillary Clinton was running weapons through Benghazi in order to arm ISIS terrorists. And now I really wasn't that political. I was like, it's all weird, and I just tuned it out. But when I saw this, I was like, well, wait a minute, is that true or not? And so I started to do the research, and I went, what? Whoa. There's actually a lot of information that this is actually what happened. And, including some Stinger missiles that weren't armed properly, that were fired by some terrorists in Afghanistan. And then it hit a helicopter, but it didn't explode. So they recovered the bomb that was unarmed. And they're like, hey, this is coming from the CIA. Why is it, entering into terrorist hands? So right. There's this long line of evidence that supports the idea that Clinton was involved in running weapons through Benghazi to fight ISIS terrorists. Google's saying, no, this is fake news. We got to censor it. So I was like, oh, I don't know whether this is censorship because it's fake news or because it's politically inconvenient. So I started to dig further, because if there's something that's going to identify fake news, then there's got to be something that's going to remove it. And what was that thing that was going to remove censorship? Well, it had a name, and it was called machine learning fairness. This is what I disclosed to the American public, and all of its related subcomponents like Project Purple Rain, and the Twiddler, which re-ranks all the searches, and it was these systems that I disclosed and said, no, this is how Google is actually doing their censorship. And when they say they don't do any political censorship, they're just liars. They're liars. Now we've got the documents. Now we know that while they were explaining to Congress under oath that they didn't have any blacklists, I literally on the inside went, we don't use blacklists. What? That's news to me. Go and I do a search for the term blacklist, and I found blacklists that were literally named blacklists.
Right. I mean, they're not even hiding it in the internal documents, huh?
They're not even hiding it. That's how brazen they are about
Right.
lying to Congress. So, you know, I took it all. I got it down because I was like, you know what? This is too crazy for anyone to believe. I got to get evidence. I started collecting evidence, basically a PDF version of all these documents. And then once I started seeing Google start getting really extreme and getting into sedition and treason territory, I was like, well, that's it. I'm now a conspirator if I don't, you know, bring this forward.
Right.
So I sought out media. I landed in the laps of Project Veritas. They handled the disclosure. They did a sting operation, and they got Jen Janai, one of the AI executives of Google, to admit on camera, she didn't know she was being filmed, but on camera, that only something the size of Trump could stop the next Trump situation in 2020.
Wow.
So boom, we got them in their own words. That came out.
Yeah, I mean, the whole world is worried about Russian manipulation, and yet you're finding that the Google search engines are clearly biased one way or the other in terms of manipulating the searches. So if people are seeking political information, I mean, these people are influencing our ability to make clear choices in terms of who we're going to vote for in the next election.
Yeah, like Russia doesn't even hold a candle to
Right.
what the power of Google has. And we're just trusting them to be okay and great because they told us that they were in their, you know, mission statement and their IPO letter and all these other things that said that we're not going to do any evil. And,
Right.
You know, and we believe them because what? Is Google lying to us? Well, now we know the answer. They were. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible story. And then you also found evidence that Google would be manipulating other searches for, you know, almost anything under the sun, really, but especially concerning our healthcare decisions, right? I mean, the searches aren't just taking you away from some political perspectives or even, I mean, you know, what do they call fake news? I guess we could kind of go here for a little bit, like these terms, fake news and misinformation. I mean, I know when these memes kind of hit, I actually spent a lot of time myself going back and forth from, you know, whatever site it was, Alex Jones, InfoWars, or, you know, Global Research, or the Ron Paul Institute, or the Black Agenda Report. I would check out, and then I'd compare that with CNN and Newsweek and the New York Times.
Night and day.
Yeah, and it was amazing to find out, well, what is this fake news of which they speak? You know, what is this misinformation? Because they pretend like people are just pumping. It's like The Onion. Everybody that's not the Washington Post is just The Onion and is just pumping out, you know, literally delusional information that has no rational source in the universe. You know, no peer-reviewed study would ever say anything that these quack sites are saying, or these misinformation sites. And so I actually spent a lot of time myself, like bouncing back and forth, trying to figure out, what are they talking about fake news? It looks to me like people just are, you know, have a difference of opinion. And then actually, as I did more and more research, I continually found the independent sources were doing just plain better journalism than the corporate sources.
If you can find them. I mean, look at
Right.
Zero Hedge. They got decapitated, but there's still Zero Hedge. If you're like a small, you know, someone that's been suppressed,
Sure.
then how do you even find them? Just like Sacha Baron Cohen said when they pretended the ADL had to come in and tisk tisk Google. Meanwhile, Zach can confirm that they've been commingling and come in and tell people you have, quote, freedom of speech, but you don't have freedom of reach. Brilliant shit. Brilliant. But that's what's happening now. And every day it's getting worse because now the Ministry of Truth, I'm appalled at fellow journalists. Appalled. I didn't think, you know, when they started recycling CBS footage, recycled from a different country, and then you just really see CBS is so in the pocket of big pharma, and they're just prostitutes. And then the real heroes are the ones who are getting smeared and banned, shadow banned, demonetized, and it's getting worse. And I think they're shooting themselves in the foot. You could see that because of social media, ironically, like was Cernovich says in Hoaxed, you know, fake news is old news, but it's social media that has helped show the disparity. And hopefully, you know, they don't shut us down completely, because citizen journalism is alive and well. And I am so blown away by fellow, you know, we live in Twitterville, or I admit I do, how brilliant these researchers are. For instance, these mothers, they know more than doctors. They know more than doctors. And then they shame you. Like I was shamed 2 weeks ago. Do you have a medical degree? Do you have a journalism degree? You don't even know who's funding your nonprofit that you're supposedly peddling shit for, but it's on your website. You don't even know who's funding you. It's just all projections, and it's sorcery. Straight up.
I mean, this whole thing about the Dunning-Kruger effect, right, just drives me nuts. I mean, I can spend thousands of hours doing research what does it take to be an expert? I don't know. Like you're talking about, there's a lot of citizen journalism. What I do is I look at somebody's article or what somebody says, and then I actually check their sources and see if the sources check out. I mean, this is how I was taught to do research in school. And so I just follow the protocol, and I try to be as disciplined as I can. And then you get blamed. Well, if you don't have a PhD, then you're suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you're making a choice about your own life or your own political decisions or your own health choices, and it really is so demeaning. I mean, you hit it right on the head with the shaming. You get shamed by people who are just like, no, the truth is this. We know because the consensus of experts, wherever that comes from, the Google AI tells us the consensus of experts. And then everything else is just a lie. And if you disagree, then you're peddling fake news. It's such a bizarre narrative. I mean, I don't even understand. Like, look, it's fine to have a disagreement. If you disagree with me, vote for somebody else. You know, go to Big Pharma for your health advice, and I'm going to take my organic tea. I mean, you know, I'm going to detox. I mean, it's just a personal choice. Like, I don't even know why we're going up against this, and why whatever the system is, you know, whatever it is that seems to be saying, it just wants everyone to believe that its version of the truth is the only narrative that we're allowed to have. It's absolutely bizarre. Anyway, Zach, do you want to kind of point to some of this? Because I know that you've done a lot of looking into how the AI works and what different tactics they use to steer us in certain directions.
Yeah, so basically the AI is a monitoring system. And what it does is it takes in piles of data and then tries to figure out patterns in them, and then comes to reasonable conclusions about how to take new data and make decisions about it. And so let's kind of walk through how the machine intelligence is trained. So first it starts off by an army of people who go through a pile of data and assign tags to it. So for example, they may go through a pile of news articles, and then they'll assign the articles either as fake news or real news, okay? And so, you know, let's say you've got 10,000 articles that are all properly labeled with fake news or not fake news. And you feed that training data into a machine learning algorithm. And what it's going to do is it's going to build a classifier. And the way it builds that classifier is that classifier looks for patterns and tries to figure out, well, what word associations results in something being labeled fake news. And so if they, you know, once they train it enough, then it learns the patterns on its own. And then once it's been, you know, crystallized, the patterns have crystallized, you get what's called a classifier. And so you train a classifier, and then forever on out, that classifier is able to identify things that look like the data that it's seen in the past. And so this is what they mean by machine learning fairness, is because what they're trying to do is they're trying to, you know, bake into this sort of Marxist corporate policy, their corporate values into the way that they re-rank the entire internet. And one of the crazy things that I learned about this, you know, sort of philosophy was from the design docs that I was able to see while working at the company. And in these design docs, which I've released, by the way, on my website, zachvorhies.com, on this document was a really interesting question, which was, if the search can objective reality be algorithmically unfair? And the answer to that was yes. And here's an example. Let's say that you're an individual and you are typing on images.google.com for CEO. If Google returns images that are mostly male, and even if this reflects the state of reality, this can still be considered algorithmically unfair and justify intervention via product intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what they're saying is objective reality is unfair and we know better, and we're going to change the information of the entire planet because we can.
And what's that product intervention?
Machine learning fairness.
Okay.
So in one of the slides that was a bombshell, we caught Google basically admitting that programming people was a 4-step process. And you can see this on my website. And it's like content, if I can remember correctly, content is generated and then it's like filtered and then it's re-ranked, and then like people like us are programmed. And so,
right.
you know, and if you repeat this cycle, what you get is a generalized echo chamber. And so what they're trying to do is that they want to change society by programming this pipeline and different sections, like, you know, what kind of content is generated? Well, if you ban the people that have a differing opinion, then you only get one kind of content that, you know, gets generated. And then, you know, maybe there's a few bad apples or someone, you know, is a heretic. Well, then, you know, censor them and filter them and push them down and make sure that no one sees them. They don't have reach, right? And then over time, the society as a whole will move into a different trajectory, and you just keep applying this soft censorship until the people reach this preordained set goal.
Wow.
And they admitted it. They admitted it in slides, and it wasn't just in one place. I found it in multiple places. And so I was like, these people know exactly what they're doing. They're Marxists, postmodernists, whatever. They feel that they're,
right.
you know, these whiny authoritarians that feels that they can just engineer society because they can.
Well, that's what it is, right? Google gave us a promise that they were going to crowdsource the information based on the individual choices in an organic system based on, you know, the choices of all the users, and instead are engaging in a top-down system of social engineering where they're literally steering all of their users into conforming to one kind of belief system, one kind of version of reality.
They're also faux altruists. I mean, the founders went to Montessori school. If you know anything about Montessori, which is similar to Steiner, I mean, it's a good upbringing. So it was also under the falsehoods of altruism for the betterment to, you know, we thought the internet was to spur connectivity and sharing, and what McLuhan saw as this global village. I mean, he's now a deceased philosopher who talked about information glut who foresee a global village. In any case, my point was that these guys fooled us into, you know, don't be evil. It's, again, an inverted truth.
Yeah, I mean, there is a kind of virtuousness that's displayed that's a false virtue. I mean, to me, virtue is standing up for each individual's right to choose for themselves, you know, health sovereignty or their political beliefs. But then you get this notion that, well, somebody on the top of the pyramid, I guess, just knows better than the rest of us how to take care of ourselves. And so they're going to start to socially engineer our behavior so that we start to follow down a path. Even when we think we're making our own choices, we're actually not, because there's so much of the information is being held back, or so much of the information that may or may not. Like, one of the questions coming up for me is, how popular do you think, say, well, naturopathy would be versus allopathy if we just had a free market of ideas, or even a lot more freedom of choice of our own healthcare choices? I mean, how many people would...
One of the reasons why they infiltrated, because the organic movement makes a lot of money, and there's criticism within the organic movement as well, because I call it the piggy effect. Like, you start off, like from Lord of the Flies, you start off having these altruistic values, and then you get rotten. So there was a movement, and there is a movement, and it's now being smushed down. And these auto suggestions, when you're talking about Google, is a very simple, you look it up, it's a simple but very powerful mind control tool. And what Zach discovered is straight up telling them, the employees, this is how we're going to program people. And their blind spot is, which was echoed in the film The Circle by Dave Eggers, was written in a book, is this transparency. So that's why someone like Zach was in his legal rights to do research, because everything was open to everybody, or to a certain extent, right? And that's why you could have someone who has courage like Zach. Where are the rest of them? Where are these people? It's time to stand up. You work in a hospital, stand up. You work for one of these dirty companies, stand up. Get the balls. It's spiritual warfare. Which side are you gonna be on? Truth or lies?
Well, it is amazing. One of the things that's interesting to me, the people that I talk to on a daily basis that really want to just go with the flow and believe in the corporate narrative and think that everybody who is going against the grain must be just listening to fake news or whatever. They're constantly saying, well, you don't listen to experts, and we listen to experts, or, you're following fake news and that's not an expert. And then it's like, no, here's 100 experts or a dozen whistleblowers from these companies saying what I'm talking about is going on, and it's like, and then they'll just come up with whatever excuse, Oh, I mean, all the hit pieces on Judy Mikovits, it's outrageous to me. It's like, I want to tell these people, do you have 2 PhDs and 51 peer-reviewed papers? Or are you just going to ignore this person because you spend 5 minutes on Google and you discover that everybody's saying that masks are great for you, so Judy must be a crazy lady? I mean, they do the same thing. It's just outrageous to me, the way that the people that do come out. I mean, I've interviewed Dr. Andrew Wakefield before, and Del Bigtree, producer of Vaxxed, and they actually call it getting Wakefielded in the medical world if you come out as a whistleblower against big pharma, because they know, you're going to get hammered, you're going to lose your job, you're probably going to lose your license, and you're getting Wakefielded. There's a term for it,
And he's lucky because he's alive. How many doctors,
Right.
How many doctors, 80 plus, that have all suicided themselves? Right. And how about being digitally assassinated when you're not given a voice? This is really the medical mafia. They're not effing around. They have the biggest lobbying power, and they have infiltrated. This is, all we can do is continue to sound the alarm. People are waking up. They are realizing that the cure is worse than the disease in regards to this PSYOP.
Yeah. Well, Zach, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just wondering if Zach had anything to add.
I'm sorry, about what?
Oh, I mean, we're just talking about, I mean, I guess we could steer the conversation in the general direction of the encroachment of this techno-fascism that's going on, and the ability to silence the whistleblower or the expert that comes out against the quote unquote expert consensus.
Right. And the thing is that it's so interesting because it's such a process that is refined. And once you see it, and you see it for what it really is, and you see it played over and over and over again, and you just see everyone else get suckered into it. So here's what happens. Someone comes out and they say, such and such is happening. And, the first thing is to start, having a follow-up study that says, oh no, like that's not confirmed. We're casting doubt on this. And then it starts accusing them of scientific misconduct, and then taking money to do this really expensive scientific study from someone that has an interest in its outcome, which is every study on the effing planet.
Right.
Right? Like, it's like people don't just give money away for science that has nothing to do with them. And so you start saying, oh, well, then, and then, it starts like doubting their motives. It's like, oh, well, that scientist is just doing science for money. That would be kind of a Snopes style article about, in the way that it goes down. So they start doing this like credibility hit on the person. And then if they don't shut up, then, eventually what happens is that they start getting in trouble with the law. Now that they saying, oh, well, this person has a, criminal smudge on it. They've got some sort of stain. And then they systematically start getting like more removed from the pool of what it means to be a credible person, a credible scientist, right? And they're like, oh, this person was like falsifying stuff and they stole some notebooks, right? And my friend was saying, that's really extreme. Like, I take notebooks home because I work on my stuff at home. Like, is that a criminal offense now? Like, what's going on? And so, this is what happens with, people like Judy Mikovits. This is what happens with people like Andrew Wakefield. They just get totally destroyed. Their reputations like destroyed. Their careers destroyed. They get blacklisted because the thing is that someone that stands up so completely with integrity can't be allowed to continue going on because they will just expose the entire criminal racket for what it is. And so they have to be destroyed and then the reputation and their name dragged through the mud.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
Can I add something to what because you were bringing up the whistleblowers. So let's, and the experts. So let's say when I was making Vanishing of the Bees, to have a beekeeper in Florida, in Dade County, to have a beekeeper in Italy, in Greece, all over the world, independently coming to the conclusion, and these are the people that are in the fields interacting with their bees, saying, I think it's the neonicotinoids, these systemic pesticides. Well, that is anecdotal evidence that at some point becomes empirical data. That is discounted. So you're going to discount that all these people are coming, and like the Mikovitzes and the Wakefields, those are the big people. There's other people that are sounding the alarm. They don't even get a platform. So luckily, let's say with David Hackenberg, who's the poster boy for colony collapse disorder, and beekeepers in general, I liken them to Greek mothers. They start talking, but still to this day, a Bayer in America will not acknowledge that systemic pesticides are harming bees. And then you do get veiled threats, like clearly someone said, if you pursue Bayer, you better watch your tires. Right. And how do I know? Because how do I know these are not related? These subtle attacks of people who have courage that are blowing the whistle. At some point, it does reach maximum. But here we are, let's say with the bees again, 10 years later, still not acknowledging that systemic pesticides are not only killing bees, worms, destroying the topsoil, killing butterflies, bats, on, humans, and the lie continues. So I just wanted to touch upon that experts' comment and whistleblowers.
Well, and I loved what you said, that anecdotal evidence becomes empirical data, right? I mean, how often do I hear both, oh, that's just anecdotal, that doesn't prove anything, or the other phrase that they love to recite over and over again is correlation doesn't prove causation. Well, yeah, but it's evidence. It's evidence of causation, right? But anecdotal evidence is evidence. Like, if we see the anecdotal evidence, maybe we should do a study. I mean, that's the thing about Andrew Wakefield's paper. It's like nobody actually goes and reads that paper that he got so much, in so much trouble for. And the mainstream media just says, oh, he tried to say that there was a correlation between the MMR and autism. Well, it was a small study of 12 kids. It was about gastrointestinal disease. It had nothing to do with the vaccines. And he noticed that 9 of the 12 kids had gotten their MMR right before the onset of symptoms. So at the end of the study, he says, I noticed that there was a correlation. Maybe we should do another study, a bigger study with a larger cohort. That's it. And that's what he lost his license because he thought maybe we should study something a little bit more. I mean, if you really look into it, you start to see like, what, what are these people so afraid of? Obviously, they don't want to do a bigger study because they're afraid a bigger study might actually discover that there is something there. And so
there is no independent studies. Bayer, the EPA tells Bayer, you do your own studies. So you have the fox guarding the hen house. Then you have scientism. People will go, he has a PhD. Who gives a F? Let's look at the parameters of the study. Oh, you're looking at bees, systemic pesticides. You only looked for 5 days, yo. You only looked within X parameter, but the bees fly 5 miles. And you only looked at one crop, for instance. So my point to illustrate that is, if it's scientism, it's the faux faith of modern science, which I've written about in length, looking at how corrupt science is. And yet, because you have your Fauci, who hasn't practiced medicine, who allowed people to be poisoned for optics in Florida so he can get his $1.1 billion for his effing Zika fund. You're not a doctor. You're a sham.
Well, I mean, you get into these public-private partnerships and the government just starts funneling unlimited funds to these people who are promoting this one-sided perspective. And that's when I've started a bit, thinking about it myself. You kind of realize it's agenda driven. It's not actually science driven. There is this, I think you're right on with the idea of scientism, and that people believe with this unbelievable faith. And it's only people, by the way, who don't actually read the primary documents, the sources, the peer reviewed sources, because the science at the very least clearly shows that there's a rational disagreement going on, I mean, that's the thing that's so frustrating to me, is when I started to do research just from a journalistic point of view or a reporting point of view. I studied history in school, so I know, history and philosophy. I know how to do that kind of academic research. And I know enough big words that I can kind of understand some of these scientific peer-reviewed studies. And I started going, well, I got to go straight to the peer review and find out where is science at with some of these issues. And you find out that it's like, not all scientists agree. There's not a huge scientific consensus. And yet the mainstream believes that there's massive consensus amongst experts that no science shows another opinion, and any reasonable person has to think according to this sort of consensus, the consensus that's created by the Google algorithms, Zach. I mean, it's amazing how it misrepresents real disciplined science. And instead of showing this scientific debate that's going on and allowing experts from one side and then experts from the other side to have a debate on a mainstream media outlet, for example, the mainstream media, the corporate media, or the Google algorithms just pretend like there's overwhelmingly one side to the issue and other people are just quacks. So bizarre, which again, then it's agenda driven. There's social engineering going on. There's something else. It's not objective science that's happening here.
Yeah. And, I agree with that. And, it's not legitimate science if the dissenters have to be disbarred, said that they're heretics and then tossed out of the church.
Right.
That's essentially what we have right now, is we don't have an institution of science. We've got a church that's masquerading as an institution of science. And that church is trying to make us feel guilty. It's trying to say that we're responsible for the destruction of the planet, for global warming, for the garbage patch in the ocean. And then it says that the only way that you can atone for your sins is by paying a carbon tax, right? So it's a church. It's not a scientific organization. The true science will free humanity. Like true science basically is, nuclear energy that can power the world without the need of fossil fuels, and is extremely safe and always available. That true science can get us to the stars and get us off this planet, and allow us to explore the solar system. And that sort of science needs to be suppressed, because the people that control the world don't like disruption to their operations, and they don't like disruption to their monopolies. And when you have these disruptive technologies like free energy and new nuclear, and I mean, nuclear is actually kind of a form of free energy. It's cheap and abundant and safe.
Mm-hmm.
They want to make sure that those really radical technologies that can change the society are kept down so that they can keep their whole racket going. And that's where we are at today. By propaganda, we thought that Google was this really great organization. They were a really great organization for a while, but it was just a means to the end, which was total domination of all searches and all phones and all email and all the communications and being able to monitor us. And what's happening is that America is waking up to this. The world is waking up to this. We wake up every single time YouTube goes and bans a channel for talking about things like, vitamin C as a possible mitigation strategy for coronavirus. And every time they do that, we're like, wait a minute, why are these leftists acting like Nazis? And then you go and they find out, and they're like, wait a minute, the Nazis were socialists and the Nazis were leftists. And we start to realize that, wow, there's a lot of history that's been faked. And the more we wake up to it, the more we realize that it's all church, and it's all church owned by a very wealthy in-group, and that in-group is going to be exposed, and their whole system is flying apart. And now we're all under lockdown because and all the oil is being stalled at sea, and all the products out of China are now being delayed because that whole system of debt and globalization and single point suppliers is collapsing. And thank God for that.
Yeah.
Right.
Here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've heard you talk about that strategy of artificial scarcity before. I think we really can apply it to the coronavirus and to healthcare in general. Like with energy, if you disallow the proliferation of technologies of free energy and you just sell people oil, then they have to buy the oil. So these people at the top that control the supply of oil, of course, end up making billions. But the same is true with healthcare, right? Or even all the sectors of the economy, the food supply, the water supply, eventually it seems like they're going after,
Well, that's why I say we're like the bees slowly being poisoned. And I've been blowing that whistle. And now hopefully people can realize what chemical body burden is and why people are being hit with coronavirus, whatever this virus crisis is, whatever strain or form, whether it's man-made or not, that 1 in every 2 people has a chronic illness, and 54% of our children are sick. And as Zach was saying, like it's the overtone window. We're normalizing pathology. This is being normalized. They're slowly conditioning us. Another month, another week, it's like 2 deaths, Costa Rica, lockdown. Bahamas, talking to the doctor who sued Fauci, 0 coronavirus, lockdown. I read something today in passing where they're saying that the highest mortality rates are now said to be in Sweden. And I didn't have enough time to check whether, because they're being applauded for herd immunity. And now this article comes out saying that there's the highest rates of death. But in any case, the point is that being in another country, you can see that this is a global rollout because that we're keeping up with appearances under BS. And every day that they continue, whether this is to foil the elections or to reset the economy, people, they're also watching us. How will we react? Will we allow ourselves to be muzzled with these BS masks? Will we speak out? It's all a test. It's all we're being studied.
Well, this is for sure. It's all a part of a large medical experiment, which I thought they mentioned in the Nuremberg Code because the Nazis were doing a lot of that and they decided that was a bad thing. But nobody's really paying attention to that right now.
The CDC just removed the Nuremberg PDF last week.
Wow.
And you could see, like if you do the search, you could see the image, but then when you click on it, Then somehow it's under the page Nuremberg, spelled N-I. Oopsie, oopsie, Ministry of Truth. It's just a little spelling mistake. Yeah. So why is that? Are they trying to? This is in 1984. The vaporization. They are. Snopes has a collection. It's called the Collective of Coronavirus like fakes. You know, if you're trying to go back in time and look at the timeline to put pieces together, and you don't know any better because you haven't been covering this from day one, forget about it.
Right.
You're going to be fed. And then you're again, I had a conversation with my mom, but now weeks later, she's like, oh, this is just the flu. But still, why are all people dying? And I don't doubt that they're dying, because newsflash, we die. We die every day. Do we talk about all the cancer rates, all the AIDS, all the autoimmunity, all the other heart rate, respiratory issues are like number 4 or 5 on mortality. And this is just fear. So I really hope that people are going to wake up, and they are. They're shooting themselves in the foot, is my thought.
Well, I hope so. I hope people can start to, really see what's going on. I think the important thing is for people to really understand that it's important that everyone has the ability to make choices for themselves. And really, we need to have access to clear information and unbiased information to be able to make good choices for ourselves, which is, I guess, where Google is coming in and saying, well, no, you're not allowed to have this information. You can only have that information. And I think in terms of the coronavirus, I mean, the alternative cures really are, I can see it right now. If I try to get on Google, if you try to understand what's really going on with the hydroxychloroquine debate, the countries that are using it seem to be getting along a lot better than the United States, which is not using it. And yet there's almost no coverage of it whatsoever, and even difficult to find it in the search engines, just like you're saying. I mean, Zach, like in a situation like this, what do you think Google is doing in terms of covering up like an alternative cure? Or if you're trying to make a search on Google to discover what an IV vitamin C might be doing, or, I've heard of doctors having success with hydrogen peroxide nebulizers. And none of this, even going back into the artificial scarcity argument, I mean, isn't this just the thing? A bottle of hydroxychloroquine costs $20. And they want you to get remdesivir. If you Google that, you're going to get 1,000 articles talking about how great it is. And that's, $1,000 a pop. So, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing an orchestrated attempt to steer us in the direction that's going to cost us the most to get the least.
Yeah, well, this isn't the first time that I caught Google, censoring information. When I was inside the company, and I typed in blacklist, I got to their YouTube blacklist that was being used by their Twiddler system of machine learning fairness to downrank content that they didn't want users to find. What was the information they didn't want users to find? Would you believe that they had cancer cures as a phrase and cures cancer? They had them both blacklisted. And, the question is why? Why would you get in between someone and their search for a cancer cure? I would guess that they might come up with a reason like, oh, we don't want to give them false hope or something like that. But that's BS. Like, we're giving people chemotherapy, which is basically World War I, mustard gas in order to in hopes that we kill the cancer faster than we kill the person. Like, this is crazy. And then I find out, well, if they're curing all these, if they're banning cancer cures as a search phrase, then I'm going to search for cancer cures on alternative engines. And what I found was that there's these cancer cures like GC-MAP and vitamin B17 and apricot seeds has been used to have remarkable success on fighting cancer. So that's amazing, right? And so it just goes to show that they're in league with some sort of dark evil force where they would go and try to block cancer cures and try to censor mothers with vaccine injured children. That's that's demonic. It's like, it's a type of spiritual like evil that goes beyond just trying to maximize profits. It's trying to do something
human.
Truly evil. What?
It's not human.
Yeah. Like, these people need to be dragged in front of a military tribunal and their crimes exposed to humanity. And then we get to point to them and say, see, this is what happens with unchecked power. You form basically something akin to the Nazis, because that's what they're doing. It's, as Maryam said, a type of techno-fascism. And that's exactly what they're acting as. And now that they're banning vitamin C and, you know, conversations like that, we all get to see how bad they really are. And it's the biggest validation that I could ever have for coming out and disclosing all this when the censorship was ramping up, and, you know, was until it is now, which is far beyond what anyone ever could have predicted in 2016. If I had gone over to someone and said, oh yeah, by the way, Google's going to be, banning videos that talk about vitamin C in 4 years, they would have thought that I was fucking nuts. But here we are, and it's happening.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's happening. And like Zach said, you know, they try to destroy, like, they're trying to arguably destroy my business. It's a machine where they had their prostitutes write a smear piece, which then conveniently justifies the issuing of a FTC letter to my business for daring to say prevention. So when even Zach was saying earlier, he used the word mitigate, I got like a flashback, because in the FDA letter, it says you can't say that. So then you start censoring yourself, and you're like, wait a second, can I say that vitamin C prevents it? I can't say that silver. Well, the army is using silver. It's listed as on an EPA disinfectant. And like Steve Hahn, arguably under quarantine, tweeted against my company. Like, you have nothing better else to do to shame people. And also, if you go to the FDA letters, because there's an operation called Quack Hack, where they say that we're the quacks, and they say hack. They have, again, under the guise of emergency and public safety, they are allowed to use hacking tactics. And you can go to the CDC or all these, the WHO, and you can see they're getting upgrades, because now they're effing with big tech, so they get to have like improvements. And this is a witch hunt when they are doing the things that they're accusing others of. It's bonkers, and it needs to stop. And we saw this, both Zach and I, with Samoa. So I'll speak for myself. I was prepped for something. I thought it was going to be Ebola. I was talking to Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. She also thought, you know, we were afraid of this global medical martial law. But 200,000 people got vaccinated in 30 days. Bravo. And look now, in 2 months, the entire economy is tanking, and we're all under lockdown.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is crazy. I'd like to maybe delve a little bit more into this idea of techno-fascism. And one of the interesting things you mentioned in one of your articles, I think you brought him up a little bit earlier, Chat Bowers, who wrote a lot about this. And he actually, there's a quote which just blew my mind. You wrote it in an article last September 2019, where he clearly said that in order to implement techno-fascism, they would create a perceived crisis, and then they would attempt to sow ideological division in order to divide and conquer the people so they could implement the plan. And it was just shocking to me that, you know, we've been talking about this just for a long time, this idea that a crisis can be used, this problem, reaction, solution to kind of manipulate or socially engineer the people, but to move us towards this techno-fascist state, which seems to be the long-term agenda. Can you just discuss this idea a little bit more, techno-fascism, and maybe even... Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just saying, also making the connection between Google and the pharmaceutical companies. I know you've done some research into that, so you can see a clear connection between these tech companies and the pharmaceutical corporations.
Well, the term techno-fascism, it was actually, I was explaining to our CTO, who was new when things hit the fan. He really stepped in, not my business partner, a total stranger, helped me really like in the trenches. And I was explaining to him what had happened, and he's like, wow, that's techno-fascism. And
Huh.
I, word wizard, like, oh, I'm like, oh my God, I love that word. I'm going to use that word.
Right.
I'm popularize that word. So when I was doing my research, I didn't know that Chet Bowers used that word, techno-fascism. And I came across an article in Truth Out, which I used to write for, and I've become even more too extreme for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out that he was writing it in the context of artificial intelligence. And I don't know if that story was in 2015, I want to say, or even maybe a little earlier, the original article, but it was, yeah, in the terms of artificial intelligence. And then really looking and finding out about the auto suggestions and seeing it for myself, because if you did supplements R, I saw what was coming up. And then looking at Verily and looking at Alphabet. And like I said earlier, when I saw that they were associated with vaccines and that they were trying to develop a one-size-fits-all flu vaccine, knowing that every year the strain is different, and that's chasing a pipe dream, and that arguably those who are vaccinated for the flu get sicker, at least from my experience. I mean, I know people who've been vaccinated for the flu and are okay, and can go into that. But that really like perked I'm like, oh my God, they're a drug company. And I never knew about the decade of vaccines. What's that all about? And Bill Gates is very much all about that. And I didn't know how Bill Gates fit into it, or Anthony Fauci at that point. So yeah, but and like I said, that's when I eventually came across Zach. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think it's very appropriate, techno-fascism, and that arguably we're not only seeing fascism, but we're seeing totalitarianism, and it's a mixture. I was trying yesterday, having a conversation with someone, I have to like come up with a quasi word that mixes both.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe we can start talking a little bit about solutions. Like, how do you get around, Zach? How do you get around the strangulation, to where you have access, more free access to alternative information? Can you get around these algorithms? Are there other search engines that you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the spirit of humankind just doesn't want to be censored. Like, especially with this, like, cybernetic meta mind, which we call the internet and social media, it's kind of emerging. You get in there and people like want to make a post or, message their friend, and then like a tech authority comes in there and applies Chinese style censorship. People tend not to like that, and they tend to start migrating away from those systems. But it takes time, because we like typing in Google. We don't like typing in DuckDuckGo or Quant or these other search engines, right? And so right now we're kind of like in this like phase transition state where we've gone from only using these top 5 social media companies, Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. And what's happening is that as the censorship gets turned on higher and higher, then people just start, diversifying and like, oh, I'm going to like start, publishing on BitChute and YouTube at the same time. And, people are like, well, maybe I'll start posting on these other sites as well. And what happens is that people just start to migrate. And there's a lot of people that are coming out there and they're saying, oh, we need like blockchain technology. And I'm not a big fan of blockchain technology for social media. I don't like the idea of something that's not censorable, because as soon as anyone builds that network, then an adversary just comes in and drops some, illicit young, pornography, and then that's game over for that website, right? So you can't have something that's immutable and uncensorable. It has to be censorable. The only question is who's doing the censorship. And, big tech is like, well, we're going to do the censorship. But I believe that what the natural course of all of this is going to reveal is that the only people that should be doing the censorship are the community, right? Like, if you want to have the same service run in a Muslim country as a, secular country, as in a Christian country, well, then you're going to need to have differing, morality standards that reflect the community of which you exist in.
Right.
And so I think that what's going to happen is, we're going to go back to the old model, which is, hey, let's use something like Reddit, use something like Facebook, but then add community-based censorship. And who's ever going to do that's going to get the users. And I think that that's going to, take a few years still. We could see an accelerated collapse of these big tech giants, because the negative sentiment is just so high right now that as soon as, it's apparent that Google's on fire as it loses its main revenue stream, which is not just ads, it's actually selling your data to China and other, intelligence agencies around the world.
Right.
And when that gets slammed shut, then all of a sudden Google's like, yeah, we don't have money to pay everyone. We're going to have to reduce our stock price. And then all these bad things start to happen. And we could see a really fast collapse. But right now they're still the dominant players. And they're going to use their power to try to do this like Hail Mary pass with the COVID-19 and the election that they're trying to help rig. And, it's going to be popcorn time for the next 6 months to 2 years.
I mean, it does seem like things are coming down to the wire. This contact tracing thing is just outrageous that they're going to start wanting to pay attention to everybody, where you're at, who you're hanging out with. And if you start to run a fever, then all of a sudden they can go out and get everybody and take them into quarantine. Yeah.
They're criminalizing coughs and fevers.
Right.
They're weaponizing the fever gun, which I predicted.
Yeah.
And
that's outrageous.
They are wanting to trace, test, and track every last motherfucking one of us, which is a reference to Pulp Fiction, which I think of that scene when I think of that terror of being tracked and traced, and I enrolled to become certified as a contact tracer on the John Hopkins. It's free. Sign up, not to become a snitch, but so that you know what's coming to you, boys and girls, when you hear the or the buzz and they tell you, excuse me, Miss Smith, were you sitting next to X whoever, and you're going to have to take a test, which then I will say to, excuse me, sorry, if that's inappropriate. So it was very interesting to take part in this. I'm not done with the certification, but I skimmed through it. So they have a glossary of terms, and they teach people like silence, and they prompt them to say like, and then there's an actual glossary term, autonomy, and a differentiality between privacy and confidentiality, and that under COVID-19, it's okay to share your health information because it's for the safety of all. Yeah. And I'm not even done with the course. Who knows what other jewels are in there? And they're specifically finding people, because we looked, Zach and I, at the job advert, which is all over thousands. Does it look like this is going to end anytime soon? If you're hiring a whole fleet of contact tracers and invoking a snitch nation, and people are falling for it, like we've never had the flu before. Like this is the first virus. Like we don't have a virome. It's like amnesia, and it's terrible. It's terrible to snitch on each other. And then the WHO chief in Europe says that it's okay to go into people's houses and take them away. And so this also appeals, like, you know, to the feminine, to the sacred feminine, the energy of wanting to nurture and care, not destroy and wreak havoc and use people as pawns in a divide and conquer scheme. So be upset, peoples. Don't be allowed to be used as pawns.
Right. It's so interesting too, the manipulation of language. I think I saw an interview, Zach, with you, and you were describing almost the cult of statism. And it reminds me of the jargon. You know, there's so much jargon that comes out of it, and people start to use the jargon and they don't even realize that they're like being handled. It's almost like a cult jargon that twists the language around, so we can't have just a normal conversation anymore.
Right.
So strange. You know, and I guess we're getting kind of towards the end here. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about solutions or what you guys think is really coming. I mean, it's hard to remain optimistic when the contact tracing is coming. We're seeing the drones and the robot dogs and the social credit system and the Chinese style, you know, the Chinese style surveillance coming our way right down the pike, right according to plan. And it does seem to me almost what you were talking about, Zach, that some kind of decentralization could be the key. Maybe not a blockchain technology, but some kind of way to organize the internet, maybe more community by community, so that there's not just one overarching authority that determines the information that is the truth and the information that's fake news, right? I mean, is that where we need to go?
Well, yeah. And the thing is that what's going to make the decentralization argument so much stronger is the fact that it's cheaper. Okay. Like, you know, one of the big reasons why Google and YouTube, well, let's just take a look at YouTube, right? They're controlling the distribution of video from a centralized source to every single person in the world. If they want a video to go down, it goes down because they stop serving it. In a decentralized system, what happens is that the consumers of the data then become relays and start serving it to other people. So you could imagine that, you know, let's say that, you know, you're a videographer and you basically get a surge of views and then it tails off after a few days, right? So what you can do is you could self-publish a video and you can seed the file. And then what happens is that when people come and view your content, then what happens is that they're required to stream to one other person. And then what happens is that all your networks of people that are streaming you are broadcasting and carrying the bandwidth load of distributing your video out to everyone in an ad hoc, on the fly matter. That a whole entire network that appears out of nowhere to serve up a video, and then once the video goes away, then, you know, it's a different kind of question. How do you manage an archive of, you know, sparsely viewed videos? But, you know, if we're just talking about like daily content from our favorite, you know, content producers, then a decentralized peer-to-peer system is going to perform way better and be way cheaper than anything that YouTube is going to be able to do with their army of overpaid engineers, you know, at the helm to make sure that that video is always available and doesn't ever have, you know, downtime. And, you know, one person can create that, you know, system of decentralized video serving. And we're seeing it happen all the time. Like, another technology that's going to do it, it's called WebRTC. And we're getting better and better results in, you know, being able to do this peer-to-peer. And so the decentralized network of the future will be like this. And it's going to be cheaper, and they're just going to have a strategic structural advantage that's better than, you know, these big tech companies. And these big tech companies are going to be fighting a losing battle. So when you think about, like, why is the decentralized system going to win out? It's because it's fundamentally a cheaper system that exists.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the profits also stay in the peer-to-peer network instead of getting sucked up into the big corporations. I mean, that's, maybe Maryam, you could speak to this in terms of like your healthcare business where you were offering organic healthcare, because that's where they nail you. And even, you start to make money, and then they say, oh, you're selling snake oil. So the FDA steps in and tells you you've got to stop. There's no scientific evidence, even if there is. The FDA hasn't approved of your CBD formula or whatever it may be. And so you've got to stop, or you've got to pay big fines. And then only the big corporations can really work within this system. And then, of course, all the profits get sucked up into the centralized corporate system. Whereas, say a decentralized healthcare system where lots and lots of people selling herbal remedies over the internet, and everybody's making everybody's making a living. It's great. I mean, this is another way of taking the artificial scarcity that's created by, is this kind of a future of healthcare that maybe you could envision, where instead of artificial scarcity created by the big pharmaceutical corporations, suddenly, I mean, heck, anybody can grow some herbs, right? If the knowledge is out there. There's a lot of ways that people can heal themselves, and it's really inexpensive. I mean, talk about expensive, the healthcare system.
Yeah, I don't know who I was listening to the other, maybe it was SGT report or X22, where he was saying why don't we see an itemized list? You only see the itemized list. I was 1 week in the hospital, not even a week. It was $70,000. And they tried to get me out as soon as they could, to kick me out. So it's sick care, and it was built on the Flexner report, and it's goes back to Standard Oil and the Rockefellers, and disrupting the whole model, and the AMA coming in and really looking at Flexner to practice study the very beginnings of scientism, and just sick care, treatment based, just not looking at the root. For me, the future of medicine is functional medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been initiatives like No Health, which is KNOW, that was initiated by James Maskell and Mark Hyman of the Functional Medicine Institute. And when you listen to these functional medicine practitioners and the specificity in which they speak of, you realize how myopic Western medicine is and how compartmentalized. So they were creating a insurance base, which was really a network, which is kind of where the coaches come in the sense of it's really about re-educating and oftentimes getting people off this treadmill, because I've had people that come to me and I can show just really a quick example of a woman who came, and I shared with her she was having liver issues, but she was so plugged into her liver medications that she wasn't ready. She came to me a year later and she said, I will do whatever you say. So we slowly got her off of her meds, and I work with a doctor because I'm not a doctor. In a week, she lost weight. She was feeling better. I just helped set her on her path. And this infrastructure that's under the umbrella of functional medicine has support, has a tailored, personalized, because we need to be individual based. Your biochemistry, your biome, your virome, whether you're vaginally born or with a cesarean, you're completely different. What will work for you to even say like HCQ will work with a Z-Pak and zinc. Well, that's if you're going down that route. But I wouldn't put in the athromycin, the broad spectrum antibiotic. I would really look at it from an individual. So it's specific, it's a network, it's a community, and it's supportive, and it's not profits over people. It's so, we have to deconstruct, and even when making Vanishing of the Bees, I noticed all of these systems needed to collapse. The educational system, the political system, the agricultural system, the money, the banking system, they're all archaic or corrupt. And unfortunately, you have to go through a birthing process to come on to the other side. And I will remain optimistic. I think meeting Zach helped with that, because I was quite bitter and jaded from being pummeled. And also meeting all these incredible people that are on the forefront, whether they're covering coronavirus, but they're really, or covering vaccine safety. And I am honored to be part of that community, and will, die for that. Yeah. So I also wish for people to use this coronavirus to go within and to see what they can, the silver lining. You hear that?
Nice. Yeah. He's got a little something to say. Zach, how about you? Do you feel reason to be optimistic right now? Do you think we can somehow take advantage of this situation and turn it into a more positive future?
Yeah, I mean, whenever there is a fall of the system, there's a renaissance that follows. And with all the technology that I've been discovering that has been withheld from humanity, when it comes and is released, then, we're going to unleash a new type of innovation that's never been seen before. And it will make the society that we live in today seem like something backwards. Like, we're literally going to build something that's akin to Star Trek going forward. And right now we've got essentially the Star Trek computers. We just don't have any of the other technology goodies, but it's coming. And, my recommendation to people is just hang tough. And, it's going to get rough. It's going to get worse. But at the end of the storm, it's going to be a new light.
Yeah, right on. I mean, I'm with you when it comes, especially these free energy technologies that are obviously out there. Once we can somehow keep the system from preventing them from reaching the surface, I mean, and people start to really be able to make use of it, it can be very liberating. So let's hope that this current systemic breakdown that we're seeing may actually result in some positive changes. Instead of continuing to go down into a more powerful system of control, which it seems to be what the agenda wants.
It's up to us. It's up to us, we the people, if we can create that tipping point, and then we have to forge a plan. I don't know how the plan can be carried out under voluntary arrest or isolation, and I don't know if civil disobedience, if that's the answer. I'm not for violence personally. So, I mean, I'm speaking in regards to this pandemic, because according to the globalists, it's a 10-year plan, and we're at the very beginning, and they're already dropping the dark winter theme, which was a simulation exercise funded by Bill Gates that went awry, that had to do with smallpox, by the way.
Right.
So not only a reference to the White Walkers in Game of Thrones.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting 10 years for sure. And a lot of us are going to have to decide, which direction we're going to go, because we're not going to have a choice, it seems, here pretty soon. So hopefully enough of us will make a good choice, and maybe we can start to really make a shift in the right direction. Well,
awesome.
Very cool, you guys. Any kind of final statements, or you want to let people know where they can find out more about your work?
Yeah.
Zach?
So if people want to join the fight, then they can follow me at twitter.com/perpetualmaniac. If they want to see the Google leaks, then they can do so at my website. That's zachvorhies.com. Check out the blacklist. That's everyone's favorite. And if they want to fight against censorship, then my advice is to come to stopbitburning.com. We're going to stop all the bits that are being burned by the big tech companies. And if you can't remember what Stop Bit Burning is, then you can use punchgoogle.com. So, so join the fight. We're going to take back your rights, because we want to leave a system of governance that is beneficial to you, your children, and your children's children to come.
All right. Maryam, how about you?
My message? What
just anything, any closing
yes.
statements, and where people can check out your stuff.
Well, it's Maryam. Please follow me on Twitter. I work for tweets. And it's Maryam Henein, MaryamHenein. I also have a YouTube channel, which is Maryam Henein B Lady. and buzz on over to Honey Colony or Simply Transformative and support locally made excellent products from people who actually give a crap about you and your health and want to empower you to be your own best health advocate and reach your potential, because we're an amazing human species and unfortunately we have been dumbed down and controlled, and it's time to take back our sovereignty.
All right, very good. And I want to thank our producers. I want to thank you, Brandon Smith, for the work you've been doing to help put this show together. You can find Brandon's work at morelawsmoreproblems.com. Also, Rob Rubin at transparentmediatruth.com. And my name is Doug McKenty. I've been your host. You can check out my work at The Shift with Doug McKenty on iTunes or YouTube. I'm also on my website is theshiftnow.com, and you can find me on Patreon at The Shift with Doug McKenty. So if you feel like supporting me, I really appreciate it. Thanks again, you guys, for being on. Really appreciate your work.
Thank you.
And
yeah, thank you guys.
Keep up the good fight.
Yeah, we didn't hear one bad joke. What the hell?
Yeah, sorry. It was just so interesting. Yeah, exactly. I couldn't get in there, but I really appreciate it. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Maryam. Thank you, Doug. Thank you guys for helping us put this together and get some truth out there to the world.
Yeah, for sure.
And,
thanks a lot.
We'll talk to everybody next time.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.